This almost never happened. The Beatles. Today, the Beatles seem inevitable. Their songs transformed popular music, and their influence can still be heard decades later. But at the beginning of 1962, none of that was guaranteed. The Beatles were still a young Liverpool band trying to convince the music industry that they belonged on a record. The group then consisted of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and drummer Pete Best. They had spent long nights performing in Liverpool and Hamburg, developing their sound. At home, their following was growing. Outside Liverpool, however, most people had never heard of them. Their new manager, Brian Epstein, believed they could become much more. He approached major record companies, searching for someone willing to give them a contract. Most showed little interest. Then Decca Records opened a door. A Decca representative watched the Beatles at Liverpool's Cavern Club and invited them to audition in London. A successful audition could take them from local clubs to record shops across Britain. On New Year's Day, 1962, the Beatles entered Decca's London studio. They recorded 15 songs, including popular covers, and several compositions by Lennon and McCartney. Epstein had chosen material intended to demonstrate their range, but the audition did not fully capture the energy that made them exciting on stage. The band was nervous, and the selection leaned toward polished standards rather than the energetic rock and roll Liverpool audiences knew. There were flashes of the group they would become, but they were not yet the confident Beatles heard on their later records. After the session, they returned home and waited. Several weeks later, Decca gave its answer: no. The company decided not to sign the Beatles. Instead, it chose Brian Poole and the Tremolos, another group based much closer to London. The rejection is often linked to the famous claim that guitar groups were falling out of fashion, although its exact wording and attribution remain disputed. Whatever Decca's reasoning, the result was clear. One of Britain's largest record companies did not believe the Beatles were the future. The rejection was crushing. Other companies had already shown little interest, and Brian Epstein was running out of doors to knock on. Without a record contract, the band's chances of becoming nationally successful were limited. The group that would later fill stadiums and reshape music was still close to remaining a local attraction, but Epstein refused to stop. He carried the Decca recordings around London, hoping someone else might hear what Decca had missed. At an HMV store on Oxford Street, he had songs from the tape transferred onto discs that were easier to present to companies. The technician making them, Jim Foy, noticed the original Lennon and McCartney compositions. At a time when many performers depended on professional songwriters, that made the group unusual. Foy directed Epstein toward music publisher Sid Coleman, creating another small connection in a chain that could easily have broken. Through that route, the recordings reached George Martin, a producer at EMI's Parlophone label. Martin was not immediately overwhelmed by the tape. Still, he agreed to give the group an opportunity in the studio. On June 6, 1962, the Beatles recorded at EMI, where Martin saw more than the audition had revealed: musical promise, humor, confidence, and unusual chemistry. The lineup soon changed. Pete Best was replaced by Ringo Starr. In October, the Beatles released Love Me Do. It was only a modest beginning, but the door was finally open. Within months, their popularity exploded in Britain. Soon, Beatlemania crossed the Atlantic, and 4 musicians from Liverpool became the center of a worldwide cultural phenomenon.